Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Industrial disasters. Human error has always fascinated me. It's horrifying to think the lives of others are a mere fuck-up away from dying. I'll start it off with a good one. Byford Dolphin diving bell incident. On the 5th of November 1983 at 4 a.m., while drilling in the Frigg gas field in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, 4 divers were in a decompression chamber system attached by a trunk, a short passage, to a diving bell on the rig, being assisted by 2 dive tenders. One diver was about to close the door between the chamber system and the trunk when the chamber explosively decompressed from a pressure of 9 atmospheres to 1 atmosphere in a fraction of a second. One of the tenders, 32-year-old William Crammond of Great Britain, and all 4 of the divers were killed instantly. The other tender was severely injured. Diver D4 was shot out through the small jammed hatch door opening and was ripped apart. Subsequent investigation by forensic pathologists determined that Diver D4, being exposed to the highest pressure gradient, violently exploded due to the rapid and massive expansion of internal gases. All of his thoracic and abdominal organs, and even his thoracic spine, were ejected, as were all of his limbs. Simultaneously, his remains were expelled with force through the narrow trunk opening left by the jammed chamber door, less than 60 centimeters, 24 inches, in diameter. Fragments of his body were found scattered about the rig. One part was even found lying on the rig's derrick, 10 meters, 30 feet, directly above the chambers.
Sullivan mine accident, May 2006. On May 15th, a third-party contractor entered a shed to perform water monitoring. The air in the shed did not contain adequate oxygen to support a human being. They would have gotten sleepy, dropped to the ground, and died. No choking sensation or other obvious signs that they needed to GTFO the shed. After they were declared missing, the body was discovered 2 days later by an employee of the company who owned the mine. The employee called emergency services and then entered the shed to attempt to resuscitate the contractor. The employee was quickly incapacitated and perished from lack of oxygen. The first paramedics on the scene found both bodies in the shed and apparently were recorded as asking someone, name and position omitted from the record, if the air in the shed was safe to breathe. The copy of the record I have is so censored at this point that I can't figure out what the response was or what exactly happened immediately after. But 2 paramedics entered the shed and died from lack of oxygen. The 5th person to approach the shed did not enter and advised others to stay out as well. The bodies of the deceased were later recovered by firefighters with personal oxygen supplies. Unfortunately, this sort of thing seems to happen frequently.
I'll post one near me, Frank, Alberta. In 1901, American entrepreneurs Sam Gibo and Henry Frank developed the first of many coal mines in the Crow's Nest Pass, in the base of Turtle Mountain. In May that year, the first buildings were erected in the new community of Frank, located on flat land between the Canadian Pacific Railway tracks and the mine. The town's grand opening on September 10, 1901 was an all-day event that included sporting competitions, with engraved medals for the victors, tours of the mine, a banquet, and a dance. 2 special trains brought in the guests and the gourmet food, including a ton of ice cream. Henry Frank presided over the event, which was attended by the Premier Frederick Waghaltane, his Public Works Minister and Federal Minister of the Interior, Clifford Sifton. Frank became the first incorporated village in the pass, and by 1903 served 1,000 people with 24 businesses and services, a 2-story brick school and a regional post office. The Frank Slide of 1903 destroyed much of the mine's infrastructure, several rural businesses, and 7 houses on the outskirts of Frank, killing 70 to 90 people. However, the mine reopened within weeks and the rail line was soon re-established through the slide path. Frank continued to boom, and in 1905 a new residential subdivision was developed out north of the tracks to keep pace with mine production, a new zinc smelter, and a new 3-story hotel, Rocky Mountain Sanatorium, close to a cold sulfur spring. A small zoo was built near the hotel, However, a period of decline soon followed. Due to market forces, the zinc smelter never operated and was converted to an ice skating arena. Fears of a second slide led to a government-ordered closure of the South Town site in 1911, and over the next several years, its buildings were torn down or moved. The 1905 subdivision remained, but Frank ceased to be an important center after the mine closed temporarily in 1912 and permanently in 1917. The sanatorium, converted to a military hospital in 1917, was torn down in 1928 after a period of abandonment. The post office was finally closed in 1968. Today, Frank is a quiet residential community of about 200 people, with few hints of its promising past. It is the smallest of the 5 towns that amalgamated into the municipality of Crow's Nest Pass in 1979. The Frank Slide was designated a provincial historical resource in 1977, and in 1985 the provincial government opened a major interpretive center in Frank that explains the Frank Slide and the coal mining history of the region. The site of the original Frank Town site is now an industrial park, and many of the historic buildings in the North Subdivision are gone, including Guibo's stately mansion and the Catholic church blown down by wind in 1917. But there are a few houses that are over 100 years old, and you can still see pieces of century-old wood-stave water pipes in Gold Creek, part of the foundation of the zinc plant and the tunnel that connected it to its hilltop chimney, and an antique fire hydrant in the old closed town site.
Alexander Kielland Drilling Rig Disaster. In driving rain and mist, early in the evening of the 27th of March 1980, more than 200 men were off duty in the accommodation on Alexander L. Kielland. The wind was gusting to 40 knots, 74 kilometers an hour, with waves up to 12 meters high. The rig had just been winched away from the Edda production platform. Minutes before 1830, those on board felt a sharp crack followed by some kind of trembling. Suddenly, the rig heeled over 30 degrees and then stabilized. 5 of the 6 anchor cables had broken, the one remaining cable preventing the rig from capsizing. The list continued to increase, and at 1853 the remaining anchor cable snapped and the rig turned upside down. 130 men were in the mess hall and the cinema. The rig had 7 50-man lifeboats and 20 20-man rafts. 4 lifeboats were launched, but only one managed to release from the lowering cables. A safety device did not allow release until the strain was removed from the cables. A 5th lifeboat came adrift and surfaced upside down. Its occupants righted it and gathered 19 men from the water. 2 of Kielland's rafts were detached, 3 men being rescued from them. 2 12-man rafts were thrown from Edda and rescued 13 survivors. 7 men were taken from the sea by supply boats and 7 swam to Edda. No one was rescued by the standby vessel, which took an hour to reach the scene. Of the 212 people aboard, 123 were killed, making it the worst disaster in Norwegian offshore history since World War II. Investigation showed that one of the beams failed because of a fatigue crack in a shitty weld that wasn't even supposed to be there.
August 1975. The Banqiao Dam failed in the Henan province of China due to extraordinarily heavy rains and poor construction quality of the dam, which was built during Great Leap Forward. The flood immediately killed over 100,000 people, and another 150,000 died of subsequent epidemic diseases and famine, bringing the total death toll to around 250,000. China has 87,000 reservoirs across the country, most of which were built in the 1950s to 1970s using low-quality construction standards. Most of these reservoirs are in serious disrepair, posing challenges to the prevention and control of flood-triggered geological disasters in areas with a population of 130 million or more.
If a country were at a state of total war with China, strategically sabotaging those dams could seriously fuck that country up. I read a pretty cool Alistair MacLean novel about a bunch of guys who hold the Netherlands hostage for ransom money by exploding a dam, with no loss of life but it fucks up an airport, then threatening to bust another dam, of which Holland has too many to protect, unless they're paid a load of whatever wacky currency those Dutchmen used to trade in.
Dams count as civilian infrastructure, don't they? Would be illegal as far as I know.
Pfft, when you've got an opportunity to wipe out 1/10 of an enemy population during a time of war, while also causing massive damage to industrial, military, and civil infrastructure, wouldn't you take it? That's why I said total war, as in no rules warfare. Nations always have a way of justifying that kind of thing, illegal or not. Back in World War II, both sides would claim they were aiming for military targets, even though bombers were rarely accurate to within 3 miles of their target, which meant they'd smash the surrounding 3+ miles all around the targets, and the ensuing civilian casualties were supposedly ignored. Even the atomic bombs dropped on the fellow in your pick were stated to be targeting military facilities, as were the firebombings before them, which caused far more death and destruction than the nuclear weapons. In practice, the civilians were usually the targets, since the rather naive goal was demoralization of the population leading to surrender, and not, as they pretended, the dismantling of the enemy's war machine. The Allies called it morale bombing when attacking and terror bombing when attacked, and it would usually consist of conventional bombing, followed by incendiary bombing, followed by gas bombing for maximum horror and carnage. By the end of the war, bomber pilots were complaining that the German cities they were bombing were so completely ruined that all their bombs did was make the rubble bounce. Sorry for rambling, but I just listened to an awesome Dan Carlin podcast about all this.
Grover Shoe Factory Disaster. The Grover Shoe Factory disaster was an industrial explosion, building collapse and fire that killed 58 people and injured 150 when it leveled the R.B. Grover Shoe Factory in Brockton, Massachusetts on March 20th, 1905. Following a boiler explosion, the 4-story wooden building collapsed and the ruins burst into flames, incinerating workers trapped in the wreckage. The factory was heated using steam radiators, with the steam being produced by coal-fired steel boilers installed in a brick boiler house attached to the wooden factory. When the 4th floor was added, the original boiler was replaced by a larger one, and the old boiler was left in place as a backup. The new boiler had to be flushed out as part of its regular maintenance, so the old boiler was put back into service temporarily. A few minutes later, the old boiler exploded, rocketing up through 3 floors and the roof. The flying boiler knocked over an elevated water tower at one end of the building, and its full tank smashed through the roof, causing that end of the building to immediately collapse, with the floors pancaking and the walls falling in on top of them. Many workers who survived the initial explosion and collapse were trapped by broken beams and heavy machinery. Burning coals thrown from the boiler's fire pit landed throughout the debris, starting fires that were fed by broken natural gas lines. The factory's more than 300 windows, now blown out, created a chimney effect in the parts of the factory still standing, resulting in a fire hot enough to melt iron pipes and radiators. The wooden floors, treated nightly with linseed oil to keep the dust down, burned quickly. Barrels of naphtha, a volatile industrial solvent related to gasoline, were stored in a wooden shed directly behind the boiler house. The shed was set afire by the burning coals, and the naphtha exploded, throwing sheets of flame onto the wreckage and driving rescuers away.
MS Herald of Free Enterprise was a roll-on roll-off, or ro-ro ferry, which capsized moments after leaving the Belgian port of Zeebrugge on the night of the 6th of March 1987, killing 193 passengers and crew. The ship sank because the crew forgot to close the door.
I was gonna post that one. I don't know why that one makes me so mad compared to other ones. I wonder if the guilty crew member realized his error as the ship started tipping and going under. Oh yeah, I was supposed to do that. Oh shit, this is all my fault.
Nope. Before dropping moorings, it was normal practice for the assistant bosun to close the doors. However, the assistant bosun, Mark Stanley, had returned to his cabin for a short break after cleaning the car deck upon arrival, and was still asleep when the harbor station's call sounded, and the ship dropped her moorings. The first officer, Leslie Sable, was required to stay on deck to make sure the doors were closed. Sable said he thought he saw Stanley approaching. He was seriously injured in the disaster, and the court concluded that his evidence was inaccurate. It's believed that under pressure to get to his harbor station on the bridge, he had left G-deck with the bow doors open in the expectation that Stanley would arrive shortly. The court also described the attitude of Bosun Terence Ailing, believed to have been the last person on G-deck, as most unfortunate. Asked why he did not close the doors given there was no one else there to do it, he said it was not his duty.
That really pisses me off for some reason. Oh, it's not my job, just fucking do it. You killed almost 200 people, you shithead, goddamn.
That's messed up. 3 different people had the opportunity to make sure it was okay, and they all delegated it to each other except Stanley, who was sleeping on duty. And 2 of those fuckers survived where 193 died. I hope they feel appropriately guilty.
Not that people dying because somebody left the damn door open isn't fucked up, but the crew of the actual boat isn't as responsible for the deaths as they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. In other words, unlucky. Ro-ro boats are inherently dangerous because cars need to be able to roll on and off them. Despite this being common knowledge, at no point did the designers do any of the following. Attach a visual indicator, a little flag or something, to the doors so the captain could see if they were closed or open. Have a light that flashes or a beeper that beeps in the cabin while the doors are open. Install a security camera pointing at the doors with a monitor in the cabin. Have the doors operated by a dead man switch. For example, to open the doors, a crewman would have to depress a button. In order to keep the doors open, the crewman would have to keep the button pressed down. To close the doors, simply let go of the button. Furthermore, at no point did the company running the boats, nor the transportation safety departments from the multiple countries involved, pass regulations to ensure that a boat did not leave harbor with the doors open. On account of all the above, the sinking of this particular model of Ro-ro was inevitable.
I'm with the one who says the crew should feel guilty. The attitude that it's the boat maker's fault because the boat wasn't mentally handicapped-proofed is bullshit.
The boat doesn't need to be mentally handicapped-proof, it needs to be human-proof. The crew weren't mentally handicapped in the medical nor metaphorical sense. They were human. Humans make mistakes, I make mistakes, you make mistakes, we all make mistakes. Now, since we've all read this thread, we're unlikely to make the exact same mistake as the ones mentioned, but we still have the distinct ability to make mistakes, and depending on our circumstances, those mistakes may get other people killed. Forgive my /v/tier preemptive counter-argument, but, and before you go on a tangent about stupid blue-collar workers make mistakes, I'm smart. I have a liberal arts degree, so I don't. NASA has lost billions of dollars of stuff and the lives many personnel because of mistakes such as confusing inches and centimeters, launching in weather cold enough to freeze critical components, forgetting Newton's second law of motion, and before you rant about how NASA is a bloated government organization, anyone with real brains goes to the private sector. How many highly educated, highly intelligent, and highly paid IT guys just assumed OpenSSL was safe? Furthermore, what is the difference, other than the loss of life due to differing professions, between assuming OpenSSL was safe and assuming the door was shut? TLL, DR, nearing the character limit. Although the crew do share a small portion of the responsibility, in my honest opinion, more of it goes to the designers, companies, and government agencies.
Yeah, I agree with this guy. Laborers on a ship who probably make minimum wage shouldn't be able to fuck up so bad that 193 die. This needed to be mentally handicapped-proofed, or turned into a profession with a minimum educational requirement. But the guys responsible are complete fuckwits. I would have charged them all with 193 counts of manslaughter, including the idiot captain who debarked with open fucking doors.
The Great London Smog. The Great Smog of '52, or Big Smoke, was a severe air pollution event that affected London during December 1952, a period of cold weather, combined with an anti-cyclone and windless conditions, collected airborne pollutants, mostly from the use of coal, to form a thick layer of smog over the city. It lasted from Friday 5 to Tuesday, the 9th of December 1952, and then dispersed quickly after a change of weather. Although it caused major disruption due to the effect on visibility and even penetrated indoor areas, it was not thought to be a significant event at the time, with London having experienced many smog events in the past, so-called P-supers. Government medical reports in the following weeks estimated that up until the 8th of December, 4,000 people had died prematurely, and 100,000 more were made ill because of the smog's effects on the human respiratory tract.
Doña Paz Maritime Disaster. The MV Doña Paz was a Philippine-registered passenger ferry that sank after colliding with the MT Vector on December 20, 1987. With an estimated death toll of 4,386 people, the collision resulted in the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history. While most of the passengers slept, the Doña Paz collided with MT Vector, an oil tanker en route from Bataan to Masbate. The Vector was carrying 8,800 U.S. barrels, 1,050,000 liters, 280,000 U.S. gallons, 230,000 imperial gallons of gasoline and other petroleum products owned by Caltex Philippines. Upon collision, the Vector's cargo ignited and caused a fire on the ship that spread onto the Doña Paz. Survivors recalled sensing the crash and an explosion, causing panic on the vessel. One of them, a passenger named Paquito Osabel, recounted that the flames spread rapidly throughout the ship and that the sea all around the ship itself was on fire. Another survivor claimed that the lights on board had gone out minutes after the collision, that there were no life vests to be found on the Doña Paz, and that all of the crewmen were running around in panic with the other passengers, and that none of the crew gave any orders nor made any attempt to organize the passengers. It was later said that the life jacket lockers had been locked. The survivors were forced to jump off the ship and swim among charred bodies in flaming waters around the ship. Yet another stupid, selfish decision by the crew.
Harutun Krekor Daglian Jr. was an Armenian-American physicist with the Manhattan Project who accidentally irradiated himself on August 21, 1945, during a critical mass experiment at the remote Omega Site facility at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, resulting in his death 25 days later. In the experiment on August 21, 1945, Daglian was attempting to build a neutron reflector by manually stacking a set of 4.4 kilograms tungsten carbide bricks in an incremental fashion around a plutonium core. As he was moving the final brick over the assembly, neutron counters alerted Daglian to the fact that the addition of this brick would render the system supercritical. As he withdrew his hand, he accidentally dropped the brick onto the center of the assembly. Since the assembly was nearly in the critical state, the accidental addition of the last brick caused the reaction to go immediately into the prompt critical region of supercritical behavior. This resulted in a criticality accident. Daglian reacted immediately after dropping the brick and attempted to knock off the brick without success. He was forced to partially disassemble the tungsten carbide pile to halt the reaction. Daglian was estimated to have received a dose of 510 rem, 5.1 sieverts, of neutron radiation from a yield of 10-16 fissions. Despite intensive medical care, he soon developed symptoms of severe radiation poisoning and died 25 days later after falling into a coma. Louis Slotin was a Canadian physicist and chemist who worked on the Manhattan Project. On the 21st of May 1946, Slotin accidentally began a fission reaction, which released a burst of hard radiation. He received a lethal dose of radiation and died of radiation sickness 9 days later. On the 21st of May 1946, with 7 colleagues watching, Slotin performed an experiment that involved the creation of one of the first steps of a fission reaction by placing 2 half-spheres of beryllium, a neutron reflector, around a plutonium core. The experiment used the same 6.2 kilogram, 13.7 pounds plutonium core that had irradiated Harry K. Daglian Jr., later called the Demon Core, for its role in the 2 accidents. At 3:20 p.m., a screwdriver slipped and the upper beryllium hemisphere fell, causing a prompt critical reaction and a burst of hard radiation. At the time, the scientists in the room observed the blue glow of air ionization and felt a heat wave. In addition, Slotin experienced a sour taste in his mouth and an intense burning sensation in his left hand. Slotin jerked his left hand upward, lifting the upper beryllium hemisphere and dropping it to the floor, ending the reaction. However, he had already been exposed to a lethal dose of neutron radiation. As soon as Slotin left the building, he vomited, a common reaction from exposure to extremely intense ionizing radiation. Slotin's colleagues rushed him to the hospital, but massive and irreversible damage had already been done. Despite intensive medical care and offers from numerous volunteers to donate blood for possible transfusions, Slotin's condition rapidly deteriorated, the worst part. Over the next 9 days, Slotin suffered an agonizing sequence of radiation-induced traumas, including severe diarrhea, reduced urine output, swollen hands, erythema, massive blisters on his hands and forearms, intestinal paralysis, gangrene, and ultimately, a total disintegration of bodily functions.
This L1 accident was a United States Army experimental nuclear power reactor which underwent a steam explosion and meltdown on January 3, 1961, killing its 3 operators. The direct cause was the improper withdrawal of the central control rod, responsible for absorbing neutrons in the reactor core. On January 3, 1961, the reactor was being prepared for restart after a shutdown of 11 days over the holidays. Maintenance procedures were in progress, which required the main central control rod to be manually withdrawn a few inches to reconnect it to its drive mechanism. At 9:01 p.m., this rod was suddenly withdrawn too far, causing SL1 to go prompt critical instantly. In 4 milliseconds, the heat generated by the resulting enormous power surge caused water surrounding the core to begin to explosively vaporize. The water vapor caused a pressure wave to strike the top of the reactor vessel, causing water and steam to spray from the top of the vessel. This extreme form of water hammer propelled control rods, shield plugs, and the entire reactor vessel upwards. A later investigation concluded that the 26,000-pound, 12,000 kilograms, vessel had jumped 9 feet 1 inch, 2.77 meters, and the upper control rod drive mechanisms had struck the ceiling of the reactor building prior to settling back into its original location. The spray of water and steam knocked 2 operators onto the floor, killing one and severely injuring another. One of the shield plugs on top of the reactor vessel impaled the 3rd man through his groin and exited his shoulder, pinning him to the ceiling.
I have one. It is very strange because it has been lost to the ages. I have seen the newspaper clippings, though. Near Cincinnati, they used to make a shortening called Spry. Grandpa was on shift when a crew of safety inspectors showed up. The timing would be comical if the next few moments were not so horrific. Grandpa was on a catwalk, and just as those inspectors entered the building, he looked over and saw the bottom of a boiler bulging. He yelled, "Look out!" But it was far too late. The tank of boiling vegetable shortening ruptured and gushed all over the floor. The inspectors were the first to be hit by the boiling oil, followed by anyone unfortunate enough to be on the floor. There were many killed. Grandpa helped remove the bodies. He never ate anything fried ever again, nor did he even want to be near something frying. One little bonus story. Grandpa was moving the worst of the lot out of the factory. A person burned so bad he wasn't even recognizable as human. This created a problem as to notifying any next of kin. As they debated this, they looked down and saw the thing open its eyes. Then it spoke, without really moving the lips because it had no lips. "I'm Jim McGee," followed by a sigh as Mr. McGee breathed his last. Jim was holding on long enough to tell them who he was.
Amazing what a single error does. Seveso dioxin cloud, July 10, 1976. A plume of tetrachlorodibenzoparadioxin, TCDD, contaminated vapors is released from a pesticide plant in the town of Seveso, Italy. Some 37,000 people were exposed to the highest levels ever recorded of a dioxin, a class of chemicals believed to be poisonous and carcinogenic, even in microdoses. Over 600 people were evacuated and several thousand were treated for dioxin poisoning, evidenced mainly by severe cases of chloroquine. Within days, a total of 3,300 animals were found dead, mostly poultry and rabbits. Emergency slaughtering commenced to prevent TCDD from entering the food chain, and by 1978, over 80,000 animals had been slaughtered. 15 children were quickly hospitalized with skin inflammation. By the end of August, Zone A had been completely evacuated and fenced. 1,600 people of all ages had been examined, and 447 were found to suffer from skin lesions or chloroquine. An advice center was set up for pregnant women, of which only 26 opted for an abortion, which was legal in special cases after consultation. Another 460 women brought on their pregnancies without problems, their children not showing any sign of malformation or pathologies.
Nedelin Catastrophe. As a prototype of the missile was being prepared for a test flight, an explosion occurred when second-stage engines ignited accidentally, killing many military and technical personnel working on the preparations. A short circuit in the replaced main sequencer caused the second-stage engines, while being tested before launch, to fire inadvertently. This detonated the first-stage fuel tanks directly below, destroying the missile in an enormous explosion. Camera operator, before attempting refuge, had remotely activated automatic cameras set around the launching pad that filmed the explosion in detail. People near the rocket were instantly incinerated. Those farther away were burned to death or poisoned by the toxic fuel component vapors. Andrei Sakharov described many details. As soon as the engines were fired, most of the personnel there ran to the perimeter, but were trapped inside the security fence and then engulfed in the fireball of burning fuel.
Qinghe Special Steel Corporation disaster was an industrial disaster that occurred on April 18, 2007, in Tiling, Liaoning Province, China. 32 people were killed and 6 were injured when a ladle used to transport molten steel separated from an overhead rail in the Qinghe Special Steel Corporation factory. At 7:45 a.m. local time, the ladle in question separated from the overhead iron rail that connected it to the blast furnace, while it was being positioned over a work table in preparation to pour out its contents. All 30 tons of liquid steel, which was at a temperature of approximately 1,500 degrees Celsius, 2,730 Fahrenheit, was split. This liquid steel then burst through the windows and door of an adjoining room 5 meters away where workers had gathered during a change of shifts, engulfing that room entirely.
Bhopal gas tragedy. It occurred on the night of the 2nd of December 1984 at the Union Carbide India Limited, UCIL, pesticide plant in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. Over 500,000 people were exposed to methyl isocyanate, MIC gas, and other chemicals. The toxic substance made its way in and around the shanty towns located near the plant. Estimates vary on the death toll. The official immediate death toll was 2,259. Water entered a side pipe that was missing its slip-blind plate and entered tank E610, which contained 42 tons of MIC. A runaway reaction started, which was accelerated by contaminants, high temperatures, and other factors. The reaction was sped up by the presence of iron from corroding non-stainless steel pipelines. The resulting exothermic reaction increased the temperature inside the tank to over 200 degrees Celsius, 392 degrees Fahrenheit, and raised the pressure. This forced the emergency venting of pressure from the MIC holding tank, releasing a large volume of toxic gases. The initial effects of exposure were coughing, severe eye irritation, and a feeling of suffocation, burning in the respiratory tract, blepharospasm, breathlessness, stomach pains, and vomiting. People awakened by these symptoms fled away from the plant. Those who ran inhaled more than those who had a vehicle to ride. Owing to their height, children and other people of shorter stature inhaled higher concentrations. Thousands of people had died by the following morning. The stillbirth rate increased by up to 300%, and neonatal mortality rate by around 200%.
Halifax Explosion occurred in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, on the morning of December 6, 1917. SS Mont Blanc, a French cargo ship fully loaded with wartime explosives, was involved in a collision with the Norwegian vessel SS Imo in the Narrows, a strait connecting the upper Halifax harbor to Bedford Basin. Approximately 20 minutes later, a fire on board the French ship ignited her explosive cargo, causing a cataclysmic explosion that devastated the Richmond district of Halifax. Approximately 2,000 people were killed by debris, fires, and collapsed buildings, and it is estimated that nearly 9,000 others were injured. The blast was the largest man-made explosion prior to the development of nuclear weapons. with an equivalent force of roughly 2.9 kilotons of TNT.
Aberfan Disaster, on the 21st of October 1966, killing 116 children and 28 adults. It was caused by a buildup of waters in the accumulated rock and shale, which suddenly started to slide downhill in the form of slurry. Over 40,000 cubic meters of debris covered the village in minutes, and the classrooms at Pantglas Junior School were immediately inundated, with young children and teachers dying from impact or suffocation. The pupils of Pantglas Junior School had arrived only minutes earlier for the last day before the half-term holiday. They had just left the assembly hall, where they had been singing "All Things Bright and Beautiful," when a great noise was heard outside. Had they left the assembly for their classrooms a few minutes later, the loss of life would have been significantly reduced, as they would not have reached their classrooms when the landslide hit. The classrooms were on the side of the buildings nearest the landslide. Nobody in the village was able to see it, but everyone could hear the roar of the approaching landslide. Some at the school thought it was a jet about to crash, and one teacher ordered his class to hide under their desks.
Pemberton Mill collapse. The Pemberton Mill was a large factory in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which collapsed without warning on January 10, 1860. Shortly before 5 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, workers in nearby factories watched with horror as the Pemberton Mill buckled and then collapsed with a mighty crash. According to later court testimony reported by the New York Times, owner George Howe escaped as the structure was falling. Dozens were killed instantly, and more than 600 workers, many of them women and children, were trapped in the twisted ruins. When the winter sun set, rescuers built bonfires to illuminate their efforts, revealing faces crushed beyond recognition, open wounds in which the bones showed through a paste of dried blood, brick dust, and shredded clothing. Around 9:30 p.m., with many people still trapped in the twisted wreck of the factory, someone accidentally knocked over an oil lantern. Flames raced across the cotton waste and splintered wood, some of it soaked with oil. One trapped man cut his own throat rather than be consumed by the approaching flames. He was rescued, but died from his other injuries.
Minamata Disease, sometimes referred to as Minamata Disease, is a neurological syndrome caused by severe mercury poisoning. Symptoms include ataxia, numbness in the hands and feet, general muscle weakness, narrowing of the field of vision, and damage to hearing and speech. In extreme cases, insanity, paralysis, coma, and death follow within weeks of the onset of symptoms. Minamata disease was first discovered in Minamata City in Kumamoto Prefecture, Japan, in 1956. Local residents had been suffering from a variety of symptoms including ataxia, general muscle weakness, numbness in the hands and feet, narrowing of the field of vision, damage to speech and hearing, paralysis, insanity, and coma. A congenital form of the disease also affected fetuses in the womb, and this horrible illness turned out to be caused by the release of methyl mercury in the industrial wastewater from a nearby chemical factory over a period of 36 years.
The Ojhri camp explosion occurred at a military storage center located in Rawalpindi Military District in Rawalpindi, Punjab, province of Pakistan, on April 10, 1988. It was used as an ammunition depot for Afghan mujahideen fighting against Soviet forces from Afghanistan. The camp exploded on April 10, 1988, killing more than 1,300 people in Rawalpindi and Islamabad as a result of rockets and other munitions expelled by the blast. 1 week after this major explosion, Defense Department officials say that they believe that the explosion was the work of agents of the Afghan Intelligence Service, KHAD. U.S. officials blamed sabotage for the explosion. There was speculation that the explosion was done by Pakistani agents to cover up a pilferage of the weapons stocks, including Stinger missiles.
Piper Alpha was a North Sea oil production platform operated by Occidental Petroleum Limited. The platform began production in 1976, first as an oil platform and then later converted to gas production. An explosion and the resulting oil and gas fires destroyed it on the 6th of July, 1988, killing 167 men, with only 61 survivors. The death toll includes 2 crewmen of a rescue vessel. Total insured loss was about £1.7 billion, $3.4 billion US dollars. At the time of the disaster, the platform accounted for approximately 10% of North Sea oil and gas production, and was the worst offshore oil disaster in terms of lives lost and industry impact.
The Lac Megantic Derailment occurred in the town of Lac Megantic, located in the eastern townships of the Canadian province of Quebec, at approximately 1:15 EDT on July 6, 2013, when an unattended 74-car freight train carrying Bakken Formation crude oil ran away and derailed, resulting in the fire and explosion of multiple tank cars. 42 people were confirmed dead, with 5 more missing and presumed dead. More than 30 buildings in the town's center, roughly half of the downtown area, were destroyed. Initial newspaper reports described a 1-kilometer blast radius. It is possible that some of the missing people were vaporized by the explosions.
Boston Molasses disaster occurred on January 15, 1919, in the North End neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. A large molasses storage tank burst, and a wave of molasses rushed through the streets at an estimated 35 miles per hour, 56 kilometers per hour, killing 21 and injuring 150. The collapse unleashed a wave of molasses 25 feet, 7.6 meters, high at its peak, moving at 35 miles per hour, 56 kilometers per hour. The molasses wave was of sufficient force to damage the girders of the adjacent Boston Elevated Railway's Atlantic Avenue structure and tip a railroad car momentarily off the tracks. Author Stephen Puleo describes how nearby buildings were swept off their foundations and crushed.
Texas City Disaster. April 16, 1947 was the deadliest industrial accident in U.S. history and one of the largest non-nuclear explosions. Originating with a mid-morning fire on board the French-registered vessel SS Grand Camp, docked in the port of Texas City. Its cargo of approximately 2,300 tons, approximately 2,100 metric tons, of ammonium nitrate detonated with the initial blast and subsequent chain reaction of further fires and explosions in other ships and nearby oil storage facilities, killing at least 581 people, including all but one member of the Texas City Fire Department.
Holy shit. I didn't know that ammonium nitrate was explosive just by itself. I hope you folks know that this shit was mixed with fuel oil, aka diesel, I'm guessing, since it's like number 2 with lower sulfur content and used in the Oklahoma City bombing. It's a common demolitions and blasting compound, I think. Also, it's been used in the '93 World Trade Center hit, where they parked a van next to the center supports in the parking garage. There was a bombing in Oslo, student protest bombings in the 1970s, etc. Ammonium nitrate is the oxidizer and is mixed with 6% number 2 fuel oil and diesel.
Crush, Texas was a temporary city established as a one-day publicity stunt in 1896. William George Crush, general passenger agent of the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad, popularly known as the Katy, conceived the idea to demonstrate a train wreck as a spectacle. No admission was charged, and train fares to the crash site were at the reduced rate of $2 from any location in Texas. About 40,000 people showed up on September 15, 1896, making the new town of Crush, Texas, temporarily the second largest city in the state. Each train reached a speed of about 45 miles per hour, 72 kilometers per hour, by the time they met near the anticipated spot. Unexpectedly, the impact caused both engine boilers to explode. Debris, some pieces as large as half a drive wheel, was blown hundreds of feet into the air. Some of the debris came down among the spectators, killing 2 or 3 and injuring many more. Event photographer Jarvis Joe Dean lost one eye to a flying bolt. They say something about tempting fate.
Only 3 died? Knowing those odds, I would have attended for sure. Definitely worth the risk to see 2 locomotives
crash head-on into each other, and explode.
This, I would attend the shit out of a head-on train crash. Here's my $2. Fuck, here's 3.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.